So I'm Pete Frost, as I said, Urban Green Infrastructure Advisor for Natural Resources Wales. And although I'm going to speak about urban green infrastructure, first I'd like to introduce you to a couple of small towns. Trumpton is a market town facing severe financial problems after more than a decade of austerity. Fortunately, they have a hard-headed director of finance who knows the cost of everything. He knows that street trees cost money to maintain, so if one is damaged, it's cut back or removed entirely. Parks are expensive to run, so the director has ensured that the visitor centres are closed and there's a fixed price contract to a commercial company for the bare minimum of work to keep the parks safe. To promote footfall and reinvigorate the town centre, the finance director persuaded the authority to open the high street to cars again. Unfortunately, costs are spiralling. The Highways Authority is spending more on road repairs because the tarmac is failing during heat waves. Social services and the local police authority demanding more money to cope with increasing domestic violence and antisocial behaviour. Business rates are down as town centre shops close in the face of competition from out-of-town shopping just over the border in the next authority. Camberwick Green has also been coping with years of austerity, but their chief exec has a growth mindset. The town centre was notorious for flooding and the tarmac suffered badly in recent heat waves. So the chief exec got Highways to talk to the Business Improvement District and they put in a new sustainable drainage system with street trees to get rid of the surface water and begin to cool the place down, just like Victoria Business Improvement District have been doing in central London for years. The chief exec is painfully aware of how much it costs to manage the town's Victorian parks, so she's looking for creative ways to change that. She empowered her officers to work with the Friends Group and the local wildlife trust to manage the grassland like an old-fashioned hay meadow that only needs cutting once a year. The city of Malmö in Sweden has been powering its vehicles on homemade biogas for decades, and here's one of their gas filling points with its own tiny little green roof. But Camberwick Green's chief exec is going one better, using the cuttings from their parks to improve biogas production from their kitchen waste digestion plant, generating more electricity to sell to the national grid. Camberwick Green has a legacy of ill health from its industrial past, along with loads of awkward little spaces in the public realm which are expensive to manage. The chief exec got social services to work with Street Scene and the local NHS trust to run a social prescribing scheme to get people active in gardening and the arts. Local people have made pollinator gardens on those wasted spaces that were so expensive for contractors to mow, and because the local university monitored the project at the standards of evidence required by the NHS, the local health trust helped fund the project, in just the same way the Mersey Forest Natural Health Service is funded. But Camberwick Green's innovations have had some unintended consequences. The town centre has become a bit of a quirky destination for shoppers, and there's a waiting list for businesses to move into the high street. Antisocial behaviour has declined, and residents on a couple of their former sink estates have started their own landscaping businesses. Most importantly, unplanned expenditure has gone down thanks to the reduced risk of flooding, lower wear on roads, and less vandalism. But why is urban green infrastructure so unreasonably effective at all these things? You can sum it up in this simple formula. Green infrastructure is greater than the sum of its parts. So for the next few minutes, you're going to hear from me why urban green infrastructure always gives you more than you pay for. These might look like trees, but actually they're social services. The Robert Taylor homes were crime-ridden blocks of flats in Chicago. To turn them around, each block's residents committee was empowered to make changes. In blocks where they chose to chop down their trees to stop muggers from hiding behind them, crime and domestic violence actually increased. Green infrastructure calms us. If town centre managers want to see more crime on CCTV, then cutting down street trees will really help them by increasing the amount of crime there is to film. Let's be clear, the only way to prevent air pollution is to stop it happening in the first place. But if you've got vehicles, you're always going to get air pollution. Electric vehicles are great, but they still produce dust from their tyres, the road, and their brakes. Street trees can trap some of that if they're carefully chosen and sited correctly, but you still reduce crime even if you only want the trees to filter the air. And you can't have crime reduction and air filtration without climate regulation. If you've ever walked down a European city street in midsummer, you'll know what relief it is to stand in the shade of a big tree. Surface temperatures can be 20 degrees cooler beneath the canopy, and that can really save the road surface too. The Woodland Trust's Urban Trees Position Statement has a thermal image of a street in Cardiff showing exactly the same results as this image from Warsaw. This looks like landscaping, but actually it's a drain. It's part of a SUDS, the world famous sustainable drainage system on the Augustenborg estate in Malmö in Sweden. All the components have been carefully chosen to manage surface water by soaking it up or returning it to the atmosphere, and it's extremely effective. This SUDS was designed to handle a 1 in 10-year storm. In its first year, it handled a 1 in 100-year storm. That's how effective. So this must be landscaping in a high-end development. Well, again, it's a drain in Grangetown, Cardiff. Alas, not the most desirable leafy suburb in the city. If you know about the Welsh Government's statutory standards for sustainable drainage systems, then you'll know they have to be multifunctional. They have to control the rate and volume of rainwater runoff, and they have to deliver clean water at the end of the system. Unlike our old Victorian sewers, they actually clean the water and trap microplastics in exactly the same way that conventional sewage treatment works don't. If you want to force traffic to slow down, then you can put in a speed bump. But this research done for the Department of Transport way back in 2005 showed that adding vegetation increased the effectiveness of traffic calming measures. But if you put vegetation into traffic calming build-outs like these in a SUD scheme in Seattle, you get all the other benefits of green infrastructure too. So the Grangetown SUDs were designed to improve road safety as well as to stop flooding and filter pollution out of the water. But did I mention that they were really put in there to save money? Welsh Water used to pay to pump sewage several miles to the nearest treatment works, but the amount of rainwater flowing into the combined sewer got so great that they couldn't afford to do that anymore. That's the real reason they added all this green infrastructure, making lives better, providing flowers for pollinators and fighting climate change. They were just a bonus. Our old municipal parks were established in an era where the ruling classes wanted to reduce the chance of rioting in our overcrowded and polluted industrial cities, and when they wanted to promote the health of the population through breathing clean air. But in this era of climate chaos, parks are essential for moderating temperatures in towns and cities. Our streets can only remain walkable in heat waves if we use street trees for shade, but unless we have parks and other green infrastructure, we cannot keep the air temperature down across an entire town, and that's crucial for saving lives. That's because we need to cool down overnight during heat waves to prepare ourselves for the next hot day. In the 2003 heat wave, nearly 15,000, mostly sick and elderly people died in France because they couldn't cool down overnight. That heat wave is going to become the new normal, and we've already seen even higher temperatures in more recent heat waves. But a review of all research on the topic showed that parks can reduce the air temperature for up to a kilometre around them. And that could be the difference between life and death for the most vulnerable. We need our parks to keep us from frying. So if parks are there to prevent riots and keep cities cool, then why are they also saving the NHS money? Well, it turns out that exercising in green environments boosts our mental well-being. A study in Finland showed that running routes were more satisfying if they had more greenery. And maybe this explains why Park Run here in the UK is so good at getting people off the couch and into their trainers. So the same local green space that's keeping us cool during heat waves is also encouraging us to get out each day to burn off some calories. But if we want to use green infrastructure to boost daily exercise, it has to be close enough to home. If it's more than 5 minutes walk away, then most of us won't bother to go there each day, and we miss out on the mental well-being benefits that come with green space. Meantime, those same local parks and green spaces are helping to tie together our increasingly fractured society. Organisations like the Black Environment Network showed how green infrastructure can help those who might otherwise feel marginalised to instead feel more secure and rooted in their locality. It turns out that the local green infrastructure, which prevents flooding, filters air pollution, keeps us cool, and promotes healthy activity, also promotes social equity. Glasgow University ran a study which showed that local green space has a positive impact on health and the potential to reduce health inequalities between the most and least affluent. If we want to deliver healthy and cohesive communities, then providing well managed, attractive local green infrastructure is crucial. But I can already hear Trumpton's finance director screaming at me from all those miles away. So, what do you call a place where you live that you never have to maintain? A hotel. And who thinks they're an affordable housing option? Maintenance has become a four-letter word. The way it's used, you'd think only street trees, parks, and green infrastructure need maintenance. The dirty truth is that grey infrastructure needs maintenance too. But because it's normally buried, we ignore it until it fails, expensively. This water main burst, and in addition to the cost of repair, it shut down the businesses on the high street of a busy tourist town for several days. Grey infrastructure fails catastrophically and requires unplanned expenditure to repair it. The costs of that failure are externalised and passed on to consumers, like the businesses who lost income when their water supply was unexpectedly cut off. But look at this ingrowing tree guard. It took years for this to happen, and the tree still delivered its ecosystem services while giving us ample time to notice that it was in trouble. Green infrastructure normally fails slowly, obviously, and predictably. Yes, it has to be managed regularly, but the costs can be planned for. And like green infrastructure itself, the maintainers serve multiple functions too. These people are our friends, and if we bother to listen to them, they can tell us so much about what's going on in our streets. They're a far better surveillance system than any CCTV network because residents talk to them, and through them, they communicate so much more about the state of our urban areas. It's time for a new attitude about green infrastructure maintenance and an end to the lies about the true cost of maintaining grey infrastructure. All new development in Wales must have a sustainable drainage system and a green infrastructure statement, and there are multiple elements of green infrastructure that can be used in those systems. But I want you to be fired up to demand that green infrastructure is woven into a multifunctional network. We must start with a clear understanding of the ecosystem services we need and design our green infrastructure networks to deliver those. We must blend all the elements of urban green infrastructure to effectively deliver the towns and cities that will keep us healthy, regulate our climate, surround us with the wildlife to boost our mental well-being, and promote the kind of society we want for our children. We need green infrastructure to deliver urban areas that are fit for future generations. Urban green infrastructure will deliver all the well-being goals, and it'll do that far more effectively than grey infrastructure because every element delivers multiple functions in the same place at the same time. We're supposed to be in an economic crisis, but we're still paying to install grey infrastructure that delivers a single service like pipe drainage or air conditioning. How can we afford this waste of public money? Are we like that finance director from Trumpton who knows the cost of everything but the value of nothing? Or are we going to be like that chief executive of Camberwick Green, someone who knows that green infrastructure always delivers multiple functions in the same place at the same time, and if planned carefully, makes urban areas healthier and more humane, where more of us can share the same space with more wildlife? Isn't that a future worth striving for? Finally, before you get the chance to ask me questions about all that, I'd just like to let you know that a lot of the examples that I've used in this presentation are featured in other webinars you can watch on the Wales Green Infrastructure Forum's YouTube channel. So you don't have to believe what I've been telling you. You can hear it from the experts themselves. Thank you so much for listening. I'd really like to have a conversation with you now about the issues that I raised in this presentation. So please bear with me while I shut down my Natural Resources Wales computer and move back to my other computer to take part in the discussion.
Well, you're all still here, so I'm guessing you heard that. And would anybody like to kick off with some questions about it? Justin, you've
Hi, Pete.
raised your hand there.
Yeah, good morning. I'm not used to using Zoom, so I can't find the function to raise my hand electronically. Yeah, just very interesting presentation, and thank you very much for bringing it certainly to our attention. It is something that, as a SAB authority, as you're aware of, which I am in East Port Talbot, it's something that we would champion certainly retrofit schemes within Neath Port Talbot in each of the three towns that we have. But one of the other things I think that wasn't mentioned in the presentation, which could also be a benefit, is the initiative of green communal areas where fruit trees can grow,
Hmm.
and that could be used as an area to dispose of surface water, for example, and can be maintained then by the community, the general public, to bring communities closer together as well, and then they can manage and maintain it. So that's another initiative, I think, which is also worth mentioning.
Yeah, for sure. And for a number of years, I believe One Voice Wales have been involved in promoting uh, community orchards. Certainly, their one of their chief execs was heavily into that and was involved with a community orchard himself. And I think maybe Coed might be interested in getting involved with
Mm.
those as well.
But the
Yeah.
initiative came really when we visited Cardiff with the Intern at the time, and we
Hmm.
did look at the scheme. I think it was in Canton that you mentioned in your presentation. The one thing that I did pick up on as wearing my highway engineering hat was the lack of maintenance really on like the pedestrian visibility displays at crossing points where vegetation had overgrown and
Mm.
the visibility display was obstructed, with regards to vehicles. But like you said, contingencies should be made at the start to put in place ready for these as a future date to be maintained, isn't it? So, and that's,
Absolutely. And I think I can't stress it enough that we ignore uh, grey infrastructure maintenance. When I was a kid, it used to be, yeah, every few months this big tanker would come around and empty all the gully pots, those gratings in the gutters and the streets. I haven't seen one of those in donkey's years. We've ignored grey infrastructure maintenance and we're storing up a massive time bomb for ourselves. And people see green infrastructure and it's there, it's in your face, and the vegetation's grown up a bit and it's obstructing sight plays, so drivers find it difficult to see around corners. Actually, that's got a safety benefit because it slows people down, and there are um, new techniques now of managing vehicle speeds by doing exactly that, of restricting sight splays. But those things, the vegetation grows up and people go, oh, it needs maintenance, we've got to spend on it. You have to spend the money on the grey infrastructure. It's just that we're not. And then we get a massive bill and we have to dip into our contingency budgets, and it creates financial havoc. Green infrastructure, we have to plan for it and do it regularly.
mm, I suppose just coming in with one other comment on the back of that, Pete, and I don't want to monopolize the meeting. I want other people to speak as well. But as you know, I like the sound of my own voice in previous meetings I've been with. But no, it's one of the other things that we are struggling from a highway development control point of view, from a local authorities point of view, and the SAB is, trying to convince developers really, I suppose, that, this green infrastructure is the key, to the issues that you raised within your presentation, because they see green infrastructure as maybe space that could otherwise be occupied by habitable space, let's just say. So it's all about units. So it's trying to find that compromise really when we are discussing new developments. And I'm all for putting the green infrastructure in because from an amenity point of view, it does look really, aesthetically pleasing is the word I would use, in terms of development, and it serves multi-purpose, like you said, and we get a lot more back from that than what we would if it was just hard structure, hard surfaced areas. Crikey,
Absolutely.
I never thought I'd be saying this as a civil engineer. I wouldn't have said this. I wouldn't have said this 10, 15 years ago, but it is right, as a cultural shift because of circumstances, around the world, not just in Wales where we are, it's around the UK and around the world. Climate change is a reality that we got to face, all
Yeah.
of us, and that's it for me, Pete. I'll hit my microphone off. I'll put my microphone on. Nice to meet you again. Anyway, speak to you soon.
It's lovely to see you, Justin. And you raised a couple of really important points. I mean, for the engineers amongst us, uh, the great Ian Titherington said, Suds, this is civil engineering with vegetation. And uh, green infrastructure can actually enable you to densify developments. The one of the directors of Green Blue Urban was speaking at the same conference after me, and he quoted an example where a developer had come up with a ground plan for a development, and then they were told, "Well, you've got to put a sustainable drainage system in there." And they're like, "How can I do that? I've got to have, a certain amount of public open space. That's part of the planning guidance. I've got to put in a biodiversity mitigation. I've got to do this. I've got to do that." And I can't afford to put in one of these massive underground tanks to store the stormwater. So the Green Blue Urban Director said, "Look, just calm down. We'll have a look at the way the site, the layout of the site, the way it slopes." And they came up with a design for a sustainable drainage system, which enabled this developer to put something like 5 more houses on the site and put in a sustainable drainage system which met all the Welsh statutory standards. So it was good for amenity and biodiversity. So green infrastructure, if it's planned from the start rather than tacked on at the end, enables you to come up with a development which is financially viable, has as many units on it as you need to make it viable, but is also a great place to live. I've noticed that Alice had her camera on. Alice, did you want to ask a question? Okay, no worries. Do feel free to put your cameras on, people, if you like. And if anybody has any questions, further questions about the presentation, happy to answer them. And I'm also happy for you to challenge me on some of the things that I said, because I did drop in a load of Easter eggs there about things like new businesses being started, or people finding it cheaper to get the community to put flower beds in bits of urban green space. So you
I think
spotted
so.
a few of those.
Sorry,
You want
sorry,
to
Pete.
challenge me about them?
Pete, I'll come back in because I just when you mentioned something, I can't resist it. I feel so passionate about it. That's probably why. But well, one of the obstacles that we tend to face as certainly from a retrofitting point of view is the loss of parking. From a highways
Mhm.
perspective, a lot of people see green areas as well as a problem rather than a solution. Because if we
Mhm.
taking away parking areas, I mean that was one of the issues I think Ian mentioned when they
Mhm.
were discussing the project in Cardiff. They were taking away quite a significant amount of car parking collectively
Yeah.
as a whole. It's part of the whole development. But in terms of the actual locations, there was just maybe two or three spaces
Mhm.
at best.
Yeah.
So yeah, parking is certainly an issue, for because obviously people with all the goodwill in the world, with active travel and so on, being
Mhm.
introduced for new developments and being retrofitted into town centres to encourage people to walk, as you highlighted again in your presentation. It's very difficult to try and get people out of that mindset. Certainly now with electric vehicles as well to
Yeah.
hand because they see that as doing their bit, for reducing CO2 emissions as well. But in reality, it's not really the case. But it does help, but not significantly. And that's the point I want to try and make really.
Yeah. Well, there was a great example of negotiating parking, which the old Interact Networks facilitation network used to use. There were a couple of towns in the UK where residence parking schemes or residents only parking restrictions were being talked about, and I think that involved reducing some of the amount of parking which was available. So in one case, the local authority hired some consultants to come up with a world-class parking plan for this parking restriction for this locality. And then they held a public meeting to present it to the residents. And you can probably guess what happened. Flipping uproar, like the Green Key scheme here in Snowdonia. It was just, even though this was world-class design, it was just savaged. So they kept trying to sell this. Meantime, the other local authority was faced with a similar problem. They didn't do any kind of a design. They held a public meeting and said to people, yeah, what are the issues facing you? And one of the issues facing them was like, well, we can't flipping park, because people are coming in. There's all kinds of problems. So they said, okay, so if we were to talk to you about coming up with a parking scheme for residents, then you'd be into that. Yeah, of course. So they spent, instead of spending a year getting designs produced, they spent, I think it was about a year, talking to the residents and coming up with criteria and ideas. They then fed those to a consultant who was very rapidly able to come up with a design, which they then presented to the residents with a bit of tweaking. They adopted that. So not only did they get their residents' parking system sorted, which it did involve parking restrictions, other bits of the town got to hear about this and demanded similar things. Meanwhile, to the best of my knowledge, the first town, the one that came up with the design first of all, never got a parking system implemented at all. So it's about changing our mindset, and rather than going in with a design and then selling it to people, it's going in and finding out what people are concerned about and talking to them about the issues that they're concerned with, and then working with them. And then, like in Grangetown, you find that people go, yeah, I can live with this. Or better still, like in that town that Interact Networks talked about, people are like, yeah, give me more. Liz at Llaes Goedwig has had her hand up for a while. Liz, I think you did try and turn your camera
I did.
on.
I'm sorry. Good morning, bore da pawb. Morning, Pete. Sorry for my technical hitches. I can't turn my camera on, which is no bad thing. There was two things I wanted to mention. The first was the just a success story, because I live in Machynlleth, and Hannah Jones from Nemutra has been responsible, or the driving force behind putting or replacing our Machynlleth street trees, and that has been an unmitigated success. It's been fantastic. The feedback from the community has been positive. We've just had thousands and thousands of visitors to Machynlleth over the weekend for the comedy festival, and the town was absolutely buzzing, and people making use of the shade and also the benches that are now put in. So I think we can see the direct success of urban street trees, and also the benefits of the shade, because for once in Machynlleth it was boiling hot, and also the support from the community, who in some cases aren't particularly supportive of trees and will harangue the council for the felling of trees if they happen to be near their back gardens, or if they're encroaching upon their personal space. So I have to say that is an absolute success. And I think one of the byproducts of the new street trees has been the communication between community groups and how positive we are about that new infrastructure. And it's not a warning, but it is a consideration for all councils and highways and maintenance. Is that in your presentation, Pete, you did mention quite a lot that communities would then manage the spaces, and communities would then take on these great assets to the community, and that doesn't come without cost to community organisations. I'm a third sector member for over 10 years. I've been working for Llaes Goedwig, and it's harder than ever for groups to maintain and keep volunteers. So there would be a word of caution that yes, the benefits are great, and we as communities really appreciate these benefits, but work with the communities and the organisations that are working with those groups so that we have the respect and the resources that you would expect from a professional organisation. That would be my comment. Thanks, Pete.
Absolutely. Before I go to Martin, before we get cut off for the first part of this, you're absolutely right. Getting volunteers and communities to manage green spaces is not a cheap option. And just like this idea of turning schemes around, so we do community engagement before we do designs, if we're going to work with communities on maintenance of green spaces, then we have to invest up front in community development and in support for those communities. We've got a fantastic group here in Llanberis, and it's run by one guy, Eric, and he's getting a lot of support from Keep Wales Tidy, which keeps this group going. That's the kind of upfront support that you need for local communities. It's not a cheap option. Yeah, absolutely right. Martin, in the 2 minutes, would you like to ask your question? And we may need to come back in the second half to answer it.
Sure. Yes, thanks, Pete. Martin McVeigh from the Public Health Directorate in Welsh Government. I just wanted to flag that last week a new mental health and wellbeing strategy was published for the next 10 years, and we've managed to get some hooks into that about the importance of the physical environment, the both built and natural, and various things about green social prescribing and the importance of community assets for maintaining mental well-being and so on. So I would suggest anyone who's championing the green infrastructure agenda, which can often not be a high political priority, to look at what hooks there are in the new mental health strategy, which is a political priority. And if you can make the most of that to push the benefits of nature for mental health and well-being, then please do that going forward. I hope it's helpful.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And if you could put that in an email to me as well.
In the chat. I'll just put it in the chat, Pete, if you can grab it.
Actually, even better, just reply, and you can all do this if you've got interesting information that's relevant to urban green infrastructure. If you wouldn't mind putting that in an email to the Wales Green Infrastructure Forum, Martin, just reply to all to the last message that came to you, and that will go out to everybody who's on the forum. And hopefully they'll be able to take your great work on that and turn it to community benefit.